Hello, and welcome to For Your Information, the Cutchogue New Suffolk Free Library podcast. I'm your host, Emma Layden, Emerging Technologies Librarian here at the Cutchogue New Suffolk Free Library. Thanks for joining us. Today, we're joined by local author Mitchell Berg to discuss his novel, Flying on the Wings of Mercury. In the novel, an aspiring author comes into possession of a coin with fantastical properties and must unravel its mysteries. Mitchell, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to discuss a bit about the book and a bit about your writing process, because this was your first novel. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah.
It's my first, and potentially, much like Harper Lee, even though she apparently had one other, this might be my only one, but not certain yet.
Yeah. And what inspired you to write this novel initially?
Well, I've always had I believe, a very good imagination. I've always enjoyed telling stories, and my career was not exactly creative. So I think I had this bottled up creativity inside of me. And at one point, I just decided that I just didn't want to do my job anymore. And with, my wife, my family's blessings, even though I was pretty young, I didn't retire because I made so much money, or I was old, hopefully. I just couldn't handle it anymore. It was stressful, the job. So I wanted to do something that really was more creative and challenging. So it was definitely a challenge. It was fun to do the writing component. And I wrote the book in about 3 months. And I said, wow, this is easy. And then my loved ones told me that, yes, it's a good story, but now it has to be, turned into English. And it has to be higher than, let's say, a 6th grade reading level. And you probably have to edit it a little bit. I said, okay, I can do that. And I realized that's really where the work comes in. That's truly the work part. The writing the story, at least for me, was fun. I enjoyed it. Sometimes the writing was ahead of my thought process. I just couldn't keep up. I was just really excited to, where am I going with this? And I had to slow down. But then once you've got, a full story, or I had a full story, then came the difficult part. Mm-hmm. So.
Which was the editing.
The editing, and also, I was accustomed to writing business letters.
Oh, sure.
So that I could write, pursuant to my communication of November 7th, please find. But that's not a novel. That's not really what people want to read. It's certainly not entertaining. So I had to convert a story, not that I'm over dramatizing that to some extent, but nevertheless, it's truly a skill to really write well. And, I have all the, there are enough accolades that I have for people that can really write. So my story, I think, is great. I really, really enjoy it. And people that have read it, they really, really enjoy it. The writing, I think, is good. It started off as not very good, but by the end of it, with my wife's editing and my daughter's editing, my son didn't do any editing, but people looking at it, plus my publisher, he did some editing, a lot of editing also, and they transformed it from just a very good story into, a well-written story. So.
I wanted to get into a little bit of the contents of the book. Like, do you have an elevator pitch for this book? How would you describe it to our listeners?
Well, that's also an interesting question, because I really didn't understand the whole process of, you go to a bookstore or you go to a library and you see, the book, and it's in this section or this section. So when I spoke to people, let's say local bookstores, where do we put it? So how do I describe it? I think it's got historical fiction, which is my personal favorite. It's got a lot of comedy, which is really my instinct to a great extent. And it's got a bit of a mystery in it, which I really enjoy. So it can't really be compartmentalized. It's not one component. So it's a little magical realism. And I wouldn't say it's science fiction because I'm really not a super science fiction fan, but this obviously has a component of it because the driving factor of the book is a coin, a 1921 Mercury dime that actually transcribes biographical information about the people that have owned it. So clearly that's not reality, I don't think. So
can I ask, are you like a coin collector?
I do like collecting things, and I love history. But the reason for that, just to simplify, to make it easier for my story, because I thought, in the book I do write about, it starts off a little bit in, Chicago's gang wars, with the Al Capone era in Chicago. Then it moved into Philadelphia, and there was a World Series in 1929. And so it really used that as a tool, as a timing to help embellish the story. Because my book is, I would almost say 4 or 5 stories, not short stories, but components to it, because it follows a protagonist who lives in Astoria, Queens, and just before COVID. And I did that obviously intentionally because I'm not a good enough writer to understand how you incorporate COVID into something. And I think that's overwhelming. So every time I got a little too close to COVID, figuratively and in the book, I became wary. So it made it easier starting off 1921. I went to the Great Depression briefly, the start of the Great Depression. So many things happened.
So did you go into it knowing you wanted to explore that era in history, and it was that the coin kind of gave you the vehicle to do that? Or did it evolve alongside it?
I think it started off that recognizing there's a good story, or there were stories. It was an interesting period of time, so many interesting periods of time. But for me, it was a little simpler. I just, wanted to do that period. And then there's a gap from early 1930s into the 1980s. Not that a lot didn't happen there, but my book's close to 300 pages. I think if I did more, it'd probably be 800 pages, and a lot more editing then. No, so I really had, I guess, some ideas where I wanted to go, and I put the coin in a position to, I guess, take me and hopefully readers there.
It sounded like it kind of just flowed out. You didn't really encounter any writer's block along the way, or did you?
Oh, I did.
And what kept you going through that?
That's a very good question. I definitely experienced writer's block. And just to jump ahead, I'm experiencing it. I'm trying to write some short stories now. I started and I stopped. I started and I stopped. So I've definitely understand what writer's block is. So there were parts of the book that I didn't know exactly. I knew where I wanted to go, but I knew that, I couldn't say, John had eggs for breakfast and that night he went out and had a party. There has to be something in between. And that was the struggle to embellish and to really fill in the blanks. In theory, with my imagination, what I was going to do, the book could have been about 40 or 50 pages long, from this story to this story to this story to this story, but that's not a book. So when I had to really focus on embellishing to add detail and substance to it, and the constant thing that my publisher told me, who's also, a writer himself, the standard show, don't tell. That wasn't instinctive to me. And it required a lot of concentration on my part. Is this something I really have to describe the surroundings, or do the actions speak? It really, it is a lot of work. It's fun. And the story, as I said, is a lot of fun, but the rest of it is a lot of work and it's a challenge. And to answer the other part of your question, how to get through it, I guess I recognize it's a challenge. And I had to do it because, I speak, some of it was just personal. I stopped working my primary job. So, my wife would come home at night. What did you do today? And she listed this, this, and this. Well, I sat and watched soap operas all day. That's an exaggeration. So I really wanted to say, I've accomplished this, I've accomplished that. And so I guess it was a driving factor that I really needed to set a goal and try to keep to it and push myself.
It jumps around locations, but New York City and the North Fork are pretty prominently featured, which are places that you both live. Did you find inspiration in those areas? Was it coming from like a writing what you know situation, or were there anything specific, like places or people?
That I've heard that before. When I went through this process, all the not cliches, but the things you hear people write from experience. Well, it's absolutely true, because it's a lot easier. AI or just the internet is a great thing. You don't want to be reliant on that too much. But some research, for 1929 World Series, I did have to check online just to verify the accuracy of certain things. And, I'm pretty sure I knew who was the president, but I wanted to confirm that, what his appearance was, and so forth. But I love the North Fork. I think it's, I used to say when I did work and we, go back and forth between the city, once, you came out here and let's say you passed Riverhead and approaching it, all of a sudden, there's the light's turning yellow. That means slow down. Okay, it's red, stop. It doesn't mean, 60, 70 miles earlier, I would have been inclined to, okay, it's yellow, speed up. You got to just get through this light. Just my whole attitude changed. It's just a much more relaxing place. And it's, as you know, it's so beautiful. And it's it is now what I know, which I'm very proud of. The city I grew up in Manhattan. I lived there my whole life. People ask me, where are you from? Manhattan. Prior to that, Manhattan, New York City. We do have hospitals. My kids were born in New York City. I was born in New York City. My wife was born in New York City. Because people think, you're transplanted from somewhere else. So, and even to add to it that there's so many details in there that you take from personal experience. My mother, who actually passed away prior to the book being published, one of the main characters, her name is Louise. My mother's middle name was Louise. Louise grew up like in Brownsville, Brooklyn, near that area. That's where my mother grew up. So a lot of the stuff that I took, was from that. There's a scene in Macy's in 1931, 1930, and the two little boys, going up this new invention, an escalator, are William and Henry. Well, William's my son's name, and Henry is, is his cousin, is my nephew. So, and there are so many personal things. There's at one point the protagonist, when he recognized that the dime was doing a lot of writing, was doing, that's where it was magical. He started questioning his own mental health. So his mental health was, when he was thinking about, gee, is there something really wrong with him? He remembered an aunt that his mother had, which my mother had an aunt who just disappeared one day, apparently. And every year or every 6 months, we'd get a phone call. And it was like an old woman, and she would speak to my mother for 2 seconds, and that would be the end of the conversation. She had just disappeared. We don't know where she was. Aunt Lena. And that's what I called her in the book, Lena. Wow. So you do incorporate, or I do. And I think it's instinctive to incorporate personal experience.
Yeah.
So,
and I mean, especially in this book, I'm partway through it. I'm sorry I didn't finish it before the interview, but I'm having a lot of fun with it. And it makes sense because like part of it is so much about personal histories. Obviously, it's like following sort of the history of this inanimate object, but it's about people's histories, how people go through their lives and how they kind of touch each other in those small ways. So it makes a lot of sense that there's so many personal connections for you, at least coming from the outside.
No, it is true. And there's one character who's rather unpleasant, and full disclosure, it's based in a small part on my father. My father was didn't do the terrible things this character did, but there's a bit of my father in him. And, so that it just comes out. It's almost therapeutic in a way when you write, because you're really putting your emotions and your thoughts and your experiences down. So I think, there is something to that it is therapeutic.
Mm. Thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate that.
No, well, would you ever stop, doing your own podcast? I mean, you'd be great, sit somebody on the couch and they could open up to you. You're doing a great job.
Okay. Thank you for saying that. And thank you. Because I mean, writing can be so deeply personal and like so deeply emotional, and also putting it out there for other people to read and consume can be, I don't know, to me, it seems like very intimidating. I have someone who tried creative writing in the past, and I would love to do more in the future. But to me, I think one of the scariest things is sharing it with other people, especially with people you don't know.
That's it. Well, and again, I had limitations. I mean, sexual content, I was not comfortable. It was all, like superficial, and as my wife can attest, for whatever reason, I don't love when people like curse too much. Mm. So, I used a few curse words in there because it was, it was appropriate to use. But, I don't think I could really write a full length, book that would appeal to everybody, because maybe it was a little bit too subdued in certain areas. But
is there anything that you hope that people take away from the book, or what do you hope will stick with people after reading?
Well, I mean, to answer that, I just hope they really, really enjoy it. And when I wrote this, I wasn't really going to publish it because I didn't want to self-publish. Not that there's anything wrong with it, because it seems so common today. It just, for what reason was I going to, to do that? So when I wrote the book, my wife particularly, she said, it's really good. It has to be published. So my publisher, it's a small publishing house. And, so it went under, his thing, it's synthetic prophetic. But what I really enjoyed when I wrote the book, two stories or two situations. One, I did a reading in Southold, and a woman read the book afterwards. I gave her my email address, and she said she absolutely loved it. She couldn't put it down. She read it, for like overnight. And we went to Grenada, my wife and I, in January. And there was another couple we met. They were from Boston. They were really nice, and we all loved to read. And I said, well, my wife told him, he wrote a book. He downloaded the book. It was the three of us left alone because he didn't stop reading it. So I don't really have an ego in this, and I mean that sincerely, but I think it's really a good read. I think it's very enjoyable. Of course, there'll be some people that don't like it. It's not their thing. That's just human nature. But it feels like you compliment my kids, oh my God, it's a wonderful feeling. So that is what I'd love, that people really, for a day, 2 days, 3 days, I've had friends say they've just thought it was great. And I've always said to everybody, if you don't like it, that's fine. Tell me, honestly. But when it's sincere that they really loved it, that means so much to me.
Mitchell, thank you so much for coming in and talking about the book on the podcast. It's really great to have you in here and talk about writing and what's inspiring you. And just thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you so much for it. I'd love to. Now I want to write another book just so we can do this again.
Awesome. That would be great. Let us know.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us today on For Your Information, the Cutchogue New Suffolk Free Library podcast. I hope you tune in again soon, and I hope you learned something new. For Your Information is a production of the Cutchogue New Suffolk Free Library. Our intro and outro music is Lavender Sky by Kaizan Blue. I'm your host, producer, editor, and emerging technologies librarian, Emma Layden. We'll catch you next time. Until then, stay open to new ideas.